Good morning and you're welcome. This is Breakfast Live here on TV Africa, and today we are at the Embassy of America in the United States of America. They say the land of opportunities, and this is where we're having a lot of conversation on a lot of issues that, has been topical over the period here. And joining me here to help me have a conversation is the ambassador to Ghana, the U.S. ambassador to Ghana herself, Virginia Evelyn Palmer. And she's a diplomat. She served as an ambassador 2015 to 2019 in Malawi, and she's here in Ghana. She started a job here in Ghana from April this year. No, last year. She's 1 year already in Ghana. Virginia, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Thanks for having us here. We are in your office. Anyway, let's start a conversation. How has your stay been in Ghana? So far a year in Ghana. How have you enjoyed Ghana?
Oh, I just love Ghana. There's a wonderful energy here. And it's a great relationship that's existed since before Ghana began even. But there's a lot that the United States learns from Ghana every day. Ghana was a really important, I think, exemplar and symbol for the United States at the time of its independence. A real symbol for African Americans in particular looking for justice in America and seeing Africa rising. And that partnership has continued even to today.
You've been in other countries on the continent. How do you compare Ghana to the other countries on the continent? What's the difference?
There's a different energy in Ghana, I have to say. Real entrepreneurialism, which I find exciting. And that has a real impact on the U.S.-Ghana economic relationship, too, which is great.
Okay, so, you're just zooming us into that conversation, U.S.-Ghana economic trade and all of that. How would you describe the bilateral trade relationship between the U.S. and Ghana?
Well, right now, the goods trade alone is $3.7 billion, and the trade in services is even higher. And there's huge potential, I think, with digital and food processing, all kinds of things to increase that trade and to participate in Ghana's economic recovery.
You know how much the USAID is also helping Ghana with a contribution of over 145 million and all of that. Is there any, idea to extend it? What's the idea with USAID to expand the?
Well, thanks for asking that. And indeed, it has expanded, as you mentioned. It was 130 million when I arrived. It's 150 million dollars today, and we layer that assistance on top of security assistance, which is this year $46 million, and with that also professionalism and human rights training for Ghana's security forces, and then those USAID programs that you mentioned that have to do with education and health and economic growth, particularly in Ghana's poorer north. And those things are integrated to work together to make Ghana more secure and more prosperous.
And also, trade in Ghana has recorded all-time high. Trade between Ghana and USA recorded $3 billion. What accounted for that? What accounted for the rise in trade?
Well, we're just making more and more deals, I think. And a lot of things that are exported from Ghana are exported under the African Growth and Opportunity Act. There are 6,000 products that can be imported into the United States duty-free. So we hope Ghana will take advantage of that.
That's interesting. Also, let's talk about the level of exports from Ghana. And it's quite low as compared to the imports we do. We import a lot more from the United States than what we export.
No, I'm embarrassed to say that we export to you about $1 billion. So you buy $1 billion worth of American products, and you sell us $2.7 billion. So the balance of trade is in Ghana's favor.
But we export more to you.
Yes. I'm working on that, but yes.
How are you working on that?
Well, I'm working to try and have more exports from the United States to Ghana. We just had a trade delegation come through here with 30 U.S. companies. There was a big U.S.-Ghana business expo that AmCham produced, and we had an Undersecretary of Commerce lead this delegation that included, for example, the National Black Chamber of Commerce, the Native American Chamber of Commerce, and a couple of other big groups. And they're looking for investment opportunities, but also for export opportunities. And if we do the things that you're mentioning right, if we do our foreign assistance right, if we do the trade relationship right, it creates jobs and prosperity in both our countries.
Do you see any gap as it stands between Ghana and US, our trade relationship? Do you see any gap?
Well, I would like to sell you as much as you sell me. And I think there's a lot of potential for all kinds of things. There's all kinds of American equipment and that kind of stuff that we can sell you. I think what's important to improving that environment is making sure that Ghana's business environment is welcoming. So we do have some concern about big companies having multiple audits a year, for example, and the regulatory environment needs to be very predictable so that companies can make decisions about whether to come in or not. It's important that groups like the Minerals Commission and other commissions like that consult with companies that are here about changes in regulations and things like that so that companies can predict it. And then one other thing, and I know times are tough in Ghana right now, but arrears is a problem. So, and I know it's a problem for Ghanaian companies too, but having companies that are owed money by the government sends a chill to other companies that might invest because they don't want to get in the same predicament.
Do you also say, you talk about the fact that things are tough here in Ghana,
Yeah.
and Ghanaians are really, really, I mean, in these harsh times, and I mean, the president has said time in that number that we should tighten our belt and all of that. From where you sit, we've had the excuse that it's COVID, Ukraine, Russia war that has plunged us into this kind of situation. What's your analysis of Ghana's economic situation?
Well, Ghana was over indebted, and then COVID hit and was hard on everybody. And I commend the government's management of the COVID pandemic. Very few deaths, and the pandemic was well contained, but it had an economic impact. And then Russia's invasion of Ukraine indeed made it much more difficult for everybody globally because the cost of fuel went up, the cost of fertilizer went up, the cost of fuel went up. And again, I think one of the best things that can happen for Africa is an end to the war in Ukraine. And that certainly made it difficult. I'm happy that Ghana achieved an IMF program in record time, and I think implementation of that IMF program is going to be key now. Now's when the hard work starts.
We've taken the first tranche of the money.
Mm-hmm.
We are implementing the IMF program.
Right.
Are we on the right track?
I hope so. I think there are points in there that require some reform of your power sector and controls on government spending and indebtedness. And if the government sticks to those programs, and the first assessment I think is in September, then you should be on track for the second tranche and for economic recovery. And the United States really does support Ghana in that effort.
How are you supporting Ghana?
Well, we're on the board of the IMF, for one thing, so a big chunk of that IMF money is provided by the United States. But things like the trade delegation, for example, $150 million in assistance, some technical assistance to the Treasury, to the Ministry of Finance, to help with debt restructuring and that kind of thing. And we kind of constantly work to make sure that those programs are doing what Ghana needs and what the government requires.
Many have criticized our governments, especially for its expenditure, high level of expenditure. Some have, preferred solution for government to even cut down its size and all of that, and how we can sustain our debts. What's the concern or what's the worry for you with our government's expenditure?
Well, right now, the IMF program is looking at both revenue and trimming expenditure. And I think if Ghana sticks with the IMF program, it will be on the path to economic recovery. And again, we want to support that.
And are we sticking to it with what we've seen? The expenditure is not going down.
Oh, I don't think there's been an assessment yet. The assessment happens in September. No, the second tranche comes in December, is my understanding. And the IMF mission comes out from Washington and does an assessment of the IMF program to date in September.
And let's talk also about, the vice president, the U.S. vice president, Kamala, when she visited Ghana this year. It was a whole lot of, great vibe around her coming. She's been here, she's gone. What was her impact?
Well, it was a historic visit. It meant a lot to America, and I know it meant a lot to the vice president to come. It was a symbol of Ghana's importance to the United States. It was her first stop on her first trip to Africa. She stayed here longer than she stayed anywhere else.
For 3 days.
And she made big announcements that were Africa-wide about the United States being all in with Africa and all in for Africa. She made announcements on women entrepreneur programs and the digital economy. And we're working every day to make sure that those things are continued and thrive.
All right, so you're still live on Breakfast Live, and I'm having a conversation with Virginia Evelyn Palmer, Her Excellency. So far, we've touched on a number of things, including the IMF program and Ghana's economic situation. We're still touching, I just heard her speak about the visit of the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, who left Ghana this year, actually. Talk of the ties she came to strengthen here in Ghana. What impact will we remember her for, apart from, the historic nature of the visit?
Well, let me also say that her coming was part of making good President Biden's commitment to Africa made at the African Leaders Summit. And that was multifaceted. It had to do with the diaspora in America, building those ties and strengthening those ties. It had to do with business ties. It had to do with national security. And again, we work in all of those areas. When Vice President Harris was here, we talked about the Accra Initiative and what Ghana is doing to ensure that there's cooperation in coastal West Africa to make coastal West Africa safe from violent extremism, and instability, which is troubling the Sahelian countries. We talked about some of the economic things that we've talked about so that Ghana and the United States can have a more productive economic relationship, build ties that increase trade and investment in both directions. And we continue to work on those things every day.
Our finance minister gave Ghanaians the confidence that in his last address to Parliament they've turned the corner. Is Ghana turning our economic corner?
Well, I hope so. The currency has stabilized. That's very important. Inflation is better. I hope it will continue to decline because I know 40-some% is hard on ordinary Ghanaians. If the government sticks to the program that the IMF has prescribed, which has to do with revenue generation, reform of key sectors, reform of state-owned enterprises, a list of things that are important, and including restraint on government spending, then yes, you will have turned the corner. I hope that as the election looms, there won't be temptation for overspending for campaigning.
Is there a cause to worry about that? As the election looms, there'll be,
that's something you have to ask the government of Ghana, I think. We're all just paying attention to making sure that the program is stuck with. We're all hopeful and helpful, I hope, to the government of Ghana.
But what would you say it's fundamentally wrong? Let me limit it to Ghana since you're talking about Ghana. We just left IMF in 2019. And 4 or 5 years, after us, we are back, to the IMF, begging for them to, help us resuscitate our economy. What's fundamentally wrong with how we manage our economy?
That's something that the Minister of Finance has raised in many international gatherings. He has some criticisms of the international financial institutions because a lot of African countries are having their 15th IMF program. And our Secretary of State, too, has committed to reform of the international financial institutions. I think we're looking into that now. I don't have specifics about that. I think restraint on spending that is consistent with revenue, growing your revenue base so that you're not only getting large companies but getting medium-sized companies is very important. I think in that regard, Ghana's digitalization efforts are really important. I think you have the capacity now to go out with a GPS and a tablet and say, "Hello, sir, business owner. I see that can I see your Ghana card, please? May I please have your tax ID number?" And if those things don't match up, or if the taxes haven't been paid, then the digitalization makes it possible to capture that revenue and to expand the tax base so that it's not so small.
I know that digitalization is also one key thing on the heart of Kamala when she came here, and women entrepreneurship as well. And I know that it's also key to you. How are you helping Ghana in trying to transform, at least send it to the nooks and crannies of the country? We are still on the track. Our vice president is championing that.
Thanks.
Digitalization.
I think there's 2 parts to your question, right? Digitalization and women's economic empowerment. Digitalization, again, has huge potential. And, artificial intelligence, Google is doing some exciting things in Ghana, looking at the weather and information that farmers get that will make farmers more productive, even small and medium-sized farmers, to make it so that they can make a living from even a small plot of land. And have less crop loss, have better information, so receive better prices in the marketplace. All of that kind of stuff is empowered by digital marketplaces. When the Vice President was here, we did a roundtable with women entrepreneurs, and they talked a little bit about the effect that digitalization had had on their businesses. And those businesses ranged from things that were digital platform based to chicken farmers in the north. And in each of those regards, digital tools were an important empowering mechanism. So making those tools available, spurring entrepreneurs to come up with new apps and new platforms, I think is really helpful to that. And so we're making some money available to spur that.
Now let's talk about corruption. I know that once you talked about how, it's how important it is for us to fight corruption as a country. Do you think we are losing the fight against corruption?
You're posing your questions very negatively. I do think that corruption undermines everything that Ghana and the United States want to achieve. You know, our national security goals are undermined by corruption. Corruption at the village level means that people don't have faith in their security organs or in government apparatus, and are therefore prey to violent extremists who say, oh, I won't do it that way, I'll do it better. So it matters to our safety and security that we defeat corruption. It also, you know, it takes money out of people's pockets. It deprives people of opportunities. So I am for anything to do to fight corruption. And sometimes that's sexy, sometimes it's headline cases, sometimes it's things like freedom of information and citizens being able to get access to information. Ghana's internal auditor does really kind of exciting things. And if his reports are followed up on, then Ghana will be more secure and more prosperous. That applies in the United States too, I will say. You know, we all need to be vigilant about corruption. I also will give a nod to the press. I think freedom of the press is vital to fighting corruption. And your ability to do investigative journalism and to shine a light on corruption and make sure it doesn't happen, make sure that people are held accountable when it does happen, is extraordinarily important. So thank you.
What's the rating of press freedom in Ghana?
My rating? You know, I had some concerns because your rating fell pretty precipitously a couple of years ago after a journalist was murdered, which of course does send a chill. And we supported a University of Ghana study recently that did report some harassment of journalism and then also some politicization of the business of journalism. And I think that's concerning. But I do find Ghana's journalists very vibrant. You're keeping me on my toes. I feel confident that you keep the government on their toes too. So I'm very optimistic. We do have embassy programs to help with that, training for journalists, training for fact-checking, for example, for rural journalists. We need that in the United States too. And we support several different journalist associations.
Let's talk about a recent comment you made that's generated a lot of conversation in the media on the anti-LGBTQ plus bill before Parliament. It's at its second reading. Parliament's expected to take the third reading. Really, what did you mean by your comment?
Dennis, can I ask you a question first? You're asking me about the bill. The journalists always want to ask me about the bill. My comments that made headlines over the weekend were made at a stand-up. It wasn't a press conference, it was a stand-up at a trade show. I was talking about the trade show. And somebody asked about the link between the LGBT issues and trade. And there is a link, and it's a potentially bad one, so I did want to address that, and I'll come back to that. But you're asking specifically about the bill. Have you read the bill?
I've read parts and portions of it.
Are you not concerned as a journalist about the provisions that would make what you're doing and our conversation now a crime? I see the bill as an encroachment on many different kinds of human rights. Certainly the human rights, which are not special rights, but only the human rights of LGBT citizens, but also journalists, landlords, ordinary people who, you know, host a group, businesses even. It is a bill that is inconsistent, I fear, with Ghana's constitution and commitment to human rights. And there are a lot of people that will be negatively affected.
The argument has also been, I mean, some legislators have argued that it is protecting our values as a country.
I want to be really careful, and I'm happy you phrased it that way. I want to be really careful to be humble as a foreigner about approaching this question. There are Ghanaian conversations that need to happen about this. So I'm not talking about the morality of this. I am absolutely not advocating gay marriage, as people have alleged. I'm not advocating for special rights for anybody. I want to ensure that the Ghanaian Constitution is respected and that Ghana's well-respected respect for human rights and reputation for tolerance is respected. I commented before that we don't want your straight children to be gay. We want your gay children to be safe. And I think that's very important. Somebody was commenting that, oh, she wants to make us American. I'm like, no, of course not. We have a great deal of respect for Ghana and Ghana's culture. But one of the strengths of Ghana's culture, I think, has been, for example, your religious tolerance, your interethnic tolerance and harmony. That contributes to your stability and the welcoming environment that is created in Ghana. And the tone of the bill contradicts that welcome in many ways. And I have talked to a lot of US-based businesses who are very concerned about it, and concerned that customers internationally will not want to buy products made in Ghana, including cocoa, for example, because it's made where there is repression if the bill passes. And so I am raising the sort of economic consequences of that. I also think that there are public order consequences because the bill has, even the discussion of the bill has already resulted in more violence against the LGBT community. And Ghana, again, has a long tradition. I've talked to so many chiefs and church leaders and politicians about this, and a lot of people say, we've always had homosexuals. Of course, you always have. And nobody's troubled them. And I think that's the way it should be. But because of discussion of the bill, people have been harassed and beat up and lost their jobs. And I don't think that that's what Ghanaians want. And it's certainly not what where American companies want to do business.
Virginia, thank you very much. I had wanted to go to Sahel region and how the U.S., some have said that the U.S. and France are losing hold in the Sahel region with the security tension in there. But I mean, I'm sure it's going to happen some other day. Thank you very much for your time with me. It's a pleasure having you. Yes, so I've been having a conversation with Virginia Evelyn Palmer. She is the U.S. ambassador to Ghana. She's had an exclusive interview with me here at the Embassy of the United States here in Accra. This is Breakfast Live. My name is Dennis Osejefi. Stay with us. We are back after this.